Hello and welcome to Wion Wallet at 5:30 p.m. with me, Chaiti Narula. Now we're doing a special on the countdown to the US election. Now hours to the countdown to the presidential elections. And here we are with our panelists on what really the outcome could be and how could that impact the economy and especially South Asia. In a few hours, America will have its 45th president. As we all brace ourselves and watch for the verdict, let's assess the impact of each of these candidates that can have on the global economy and, of course, India as well. Political views largely impact global investment behaviors. And discussing the impact of this election run-up on business, I have with me a panel of guests today in the studio and, of course, joining me from Mumbai as well. First up, we've got Jitendra Bhargava, the former executive director, the ex-Air India chief, and of course he's an author as well, talking on the impact that India Incorporated would face at the back of these elections. We have Mr. Pramod Bhasin, who is the founder of Genpact, Roddy Sale, consultant and former head of investment banking from JP Morgan, Sunil Raina, the business head of Zolo Mobiles, Sanjeev Dhawan, director of JV Capital, Abhimanyu Safat, VP of IIFL, and Ajay Kedia of Kedia Commodities. Now let's start off with Mr. Bhasin here in the studio. Only 2 years ago, you had Barack Obama and Narendra Modi set the goal of increasing bilateral trade to $500 billion US by the year 2020. Now, should the Indian government keep the expectation alive to achieve this goal, no matter who ends up winning the election? What do you have to say about that?
Mr. Bhasin?
Yes, Mr. Raina.
Okay. I think in terms of Indian opportunity, it's very large for anybody,
Right.
especially America. I think very rightly said by Obama that it's 95% of his customers are outside America, and we are a very large part of that. So I think this possibility of $500 billion trade with America is something that can turn into reality. And none of the presidents,
Right.
whoever becomes the president,
Right.
can really not pursue that agenda. I think
Right.
it's good for America, it's good for India anyways, because India is a bright spot today. And if you ignore
Absolutely.
India, you have to ignore it at your own peril. I think that's the possibility.
Absolutely.
that
You know,
happens.
just shifting a little away from this, we were discussing this offline earlier. And Jasper and, of course, Mr. Raina, you had your opinions about who really will actually end up winning the elections. And we did a bit of a trivia between ourselves. Mr. Raina, you go with Trump, isn't it?
I go with Trump because I think he might throw a surprise because he's currently appealing to a very strong sentiment that exists in
Right.
India, in US, where the divide between rich and poor is actually widening, and that's something that people like to hear. That's something that people want to hear, and he's appealing to the sentiments of people, and therefore he might spring a surprise. And on the other hand, maybe there is complacency on
Sure.
the supporters of Clinton's side, and that might just go against her.
Sure. Now, Jasper, I'm going to come to you. You had some very interesting inputs on what happens if Trump ends up winning, but you obviously stand divided on the fact, and you have a clear difference of opinion from him as to who's going to win the election today.
I think, Chaiti, first of all, my forecasting skills have taken a bath since Brexit,
Yeah.
which I called wrongly, along with many
If
other
Brexit
people.
is really anything to go by, then you cannot be trusting the polls, absolutely, isn't
and my
it?
forecasting skills
Yeah.
can't be trusted either. I'm personally forecasting Clinton,
Right.
but it's very hard to know. Possibly there will be a shock.
Sure. And what happens if Trump wins? I believe you had an interesting anecdote over there.
Yeah, I saw an interesting analogy on this today, which was the choice between Clinton and Trump. For Clinton, it's a bit like reading your third Dan Brown novel.
Right.
You know it's something to do with the Vatican. It's generally predictable with the odd bit of excitement. And with Trump, it's the equivalent of throwing yourself out a third-floor window, which might strike you as exciting and different at the time, but whether you break both legs and two arms, who knows?
Sure. Now, I hope we have Mr. Jitendra Bhargava and Pramod Bhasin of Genpact really patched on to our show. In case we don't, then Mr. Raina, I'm going to come to you with this. Now, India will require the close cooperation to ensure the success of the Make in India campaign that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been talking about now. How proactive is the Trump government or the Clinton government going to be in the Make in India regard?
So I think in case of Clinton, there is this comfort of predictability for sure, because she's going to carry forward what was done by Obama. So there is clear understanding of what is likely to happen in that case. But I think Trump is a surprise, something that we can only make our guesses, and we really don't know how it will happen. But like I said, it is, if he really wants to make America great again, I think he will have to look at India very seriously and try and pursue what has been already decided between Obama and Narendra Modi for that.
Now, is there going to be a bit of a black swan event of sorts if Trump comes into power for the global economy per se, including, of course, India?
I think it's entirely unpredictable.
Right.
That's at the centre of this debate, whether he's a black swan, a white swan, an ugly duckling. No one could be quite sure at this stage of the game, possibly.
And the views on immigration that Trump government would really have, it's going to be a bit of a flashpoint of India, isn't it?
Of course. I think if Trump is going to take that route, where he's going to create what I call is a China of its sort, where he's going to create tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers, and then create these issues. I think it's going to be very detrimental for America. But at the same time, from India's standpoint, it is going to be one of the things that might evoke a reaction from India. And if Trump chooses that path, then so many countries, there's going to be equal and opposite reaction, so to speak, and it might just fall apart completely all over the world, for that matter.
Sure. We've got Mr. Pramod Bhasin also patched up from Genpact. Now, Mr. Bhasin, this question goes out to you. Now, Trump wants to bring jobs back to India and stop the H-1B visas. Indians are the biggest beneficiaries of this visa. Now, Clinton, on the other hand, is pushing for automatic green cards for Indian students. What do you really have to say about this policy in each of the cases if either of them wins?
I think, one, let's segregate what is hyperbole and a lot of noise and a lot of nonsense that has been spoken pre-election, which always changes quite dramatically once you do get elected and you have to face reality.
Right.
So, to some extent, we've all listened to Trump blowing his mouth off. We've listened to Clinton trying to appease whatever constituents she thinks she has. If you listen to Hillary in private to fundraisers, she has always supported industry big time. By the way, Trump has made a lot of money out of capitalism, and this divide that he talks about is singularly represented in himself. So I don't think you're going to see necessarily huge moves from either of them once they do get elected. Two, on this myth about H-1B visas, let's be very clear. The Indian IT industry is not the biggest beneficiary of these visas. We take less than 20% of these visas. People from all over the world for all kinds of other things get these visas as well. So targeting us is as much rhetoric and a soundbite. It has no basis in fact and data. I think economies and countries are facing an onslaught of globalization recently, because of the widening gap that has happened in countries like the US. That's something he will try and solve, and maybe he will try and curtail or change the way immigration and visas are issued. But trust me, there is an enormous limitation to how effective these guys can be, because industry has its own mind. It's not easy to pass these legislations. There's a lot of lobbying that happens. There's a lot of people who have a view. And once you're elected, I think we'll see the difference. I do think we should wait to see what happens, because all these guys generally tend to sober up quite substantially. Even though I agree with everyone, we've never seen anything like Trump before.
Right, but as far as the economic policies are concerned, how is the outsourcing to India likely to get impacted between Hillary and Trump?
I think lots of people talk about outsourcing, and I should just clarify, I'm not sitting at Genpact. I'm the founder, and I left them a while ago, but so I'm not speaking for them. But the outsourcing policy will be impacted only in terms of visas if they try and tighten that to any extent, which I don't think is likely to happen. America needs technology, and America needs technicians. They need engineers, they need accountants, they need lots of people. Unemployment is very low in America today. It's worked out very well during the Obama's reign, and they've recovered the best out of the financial crisis that happened in the 2008 to 2011 period. So they cannot just walk away and say, okay, we don't need anyone else's support. Remember also, as Obama has said, and as every multinational in America will tell you, over 50 to 60% of their profits come from the globe, from the rest of the world, not from America. So the repercussions of all this are enormous. You know, when you're talking about sound bites and trying to get votes, you can ignore all of these. When you're elected and trying to get a bill passed, I mean, all of this hits you smack in the face. So I don't think actually a lot of this will change in any substantive way.
Right.
My biggest worry, if I may say it, is not about what happens to outsourcing, I'm sorry, is about economic volatility caused by stupid statements. That's
you know,
really
stay
what
with
I
that
think
thought.
we
Actually
worry
made a
about the
very,
most.
very good
Who's
point.
going to say what to whom?
Right, you made a very, very good point about how the economic volatility could set in with those stupid statements that we are really talking about. I mean, people across the board have really thought that Trump is a bit of a loose cannon as far as policies are concerned and as far as what he speaks is concerned. And India Incorporated sure does not have much faith in him. But if Hillary on the other side continues, it's going to be a continuation of what we've seen before. And do you think the economic policies will remain constant from what we've seen from the Obama regime onto the Hillary regime?
Actually, I don't expect too much of innovation going forward in the
Right.
Hillary Clinton's rule. I think
Right.
it would be more of the same in my mind rather than having something very drastic changes happening. So I think from that standpoint, it is comforting to that extent. But I think if it is the other way around, so then we'll have to perhaps go back to the
Jasmine?
drawing board again.
Sure, Jasmine, I'm going to actually come to you on this one now. The Trans-Pacific Partnership that Hillary is closely been talking about, how do you think that will impact India Incorporated? And I ask you that because you're somebody who really brings brands into India. You work very closely. I mean, I know you're from UK, but you are working with India very, very closely. So how do you think that Trans-Pacific Partnership is going to stand affected?
Well, I think if Clinton gets in, and assuming that they continue to pursue the TPP, that's very positive by and large for India. I suppose the only note of caution I'd sound is that there's currently a fair amount of skepticism doing the rounds in the world
Right,
on trade
right.
agreements generally, and whether you can actually put them to bed. So my view on all of this is TPP is a good thing.
Right.
Whether they can close TPP might be another story. I mean, you saw in recent trade talks between the European Union and Canada that a lesser-known minority group within Belgium called the Walloons
Right.
almost tipped the whole thing over at the end. So who knows whether there are Walloons lurking in Asia. But let's see.
All right, so Mr. Jitendra Bhargav now joins us from the Mumbai studio. I'm going to place this question to him really and bring him into this panel discussion. Now, Mr. Bhargava, would you agree that free trade across countries would get affected and South Asian nations that are really entangled in a globalized economy cannot be immune from these effects? All right, I think we've lost the connection to Mr. Bhargava there. Jasmine, I'm going to continue with you with that question, really.
Look, I think, you know, it's a difference between a Clinton approach and an unknown Trump approach.
Right.
As people have been saying on the panel,
Right.
if Clinton gets in, then I don't think there should be any great fear for, you know, the bilateral or multilateral trade agreements that are
Right.
in progress. If Trump gets in, different matter.
Sure.
So let's see. Unquestionably, all of us are tied up in a kind of global alphabet soup.
All right.
But what happens? Who knows?
All right, Mr. Bhasin, I'm going to come to you now. What is your, what do you have to add to what Jasper is saying at this point of time?
I'm sorry? Sorry, I didn't get that.
Would you have to add to what Jasper is saying at this point of time? We're talking about the free trade across countries getting
You know,
affected and South Asian nations that are widely entangled in the
Yes.
free trade.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. No. You know, free trade is under attack for a whole variety of reasons which existed without Trump being there or Clinton being there. That attack is likely to continue. It's driven by immigration that is happening across Europe. It's driven by consequences of Brexit. it's driven by too many jobs going to Mexico, all of that discussion. It's driven by TPP and potential for that. So I think those are under attack, but my confidence is that over a period of time, these will right itself. There is a huge need to correct severe imbalances in many countries between rich and poor, particularly in America. You know, the problem in America is if you're a middle-class voter who's retired and whose savings are in the bank, you're going to earn 1% on that money for the rest of your life, and you can't really live on it. It's a dire state for the richest country in the world. And I think those influences far outweigh what Trump or Clinton may say. And so that's what I worry about a lot more. Personally, I really believe that Trump, despite his idiotic rhetoric, and I say that with full knowledge of what I'm saying, is actually a businessman at heart. He knows how business is done. He is doing business all over the world. He knows what free trade agreements mean. He knows what freely convertible exchanges mean. And I think any reparations, any changes to free trade agreement will hit America harder than it might hit many other countries, because you can't unravel this anymore. You know, it's an omelet and you've broken the egg and you can't put the eggs back together so easily. So I actually think Trump will recover from this and look around and say, God, I'm a businessman first. I need to make this work for the world. And I think he will get that, and I think his rhetoric will go to where it belongs, which is in the giant dustbin.
All right, Mr. Bhargav, we're going to come to you now. Jitendra Bhargav there, ex-chief of Air Asia, joining in to this discussion. Now, let's wind back, Mr. Bhargav, to the George H.W. Bush election in the year 1992. Now, rising employment and economic stagnation were on top of voters' mind at that point of time. Now, what economic issues are voters looking at this time before electing their president? I mean, the voting has already begun as we speak. All right, we've lost.
The reality is economy
Continue, Mr. Bhargav.
has not been doing well. There's no denying it needs.
Mr. Bhargav, please continue. We can hear you.
Okay, you can. So you know what the economy, whether it's in America or in India, needs is an impetus. And if we link it up to the elections thing and said, okay, if candidate A or candidate B wins, it has a set of policies, and they will usher in those policies which will act as a catalyst for economic growth. It no longer happens that day. We know it for sure that the economy has been globalized. There are various players. It's no longer being dictated by one nation. If China is on one side, United States there's Europe kind of thing, and then there is India emerging as a good third largest economy, fastest economy. So you have all these factors that come into play. Now, if we look at strictly from India's perspective, Indians have been following the US elections like never before. We have been keeping track of every development that's taking place as if it's a cricket match that we follow in India, you know. And likewise, when we look at it on what's to be done, like today, we know it, Ms. Clinton has been talking about reducing prices of medicines. Now, what has happened is that the Indian pharmaceutical companies, many of which have almost 30% of the sales in the United States, have taken a beating on the stock exchange in the past 2 days.
Absolutely.
So there is going to be a bearing on it, and we look at it from that perspective. How do you do it? Now, if we have these things available, now, as the previous speaker very rightly said, much of what is spoken in the election is for public consumption. Now, is it really going to happen? Remains to be seen. So Indian business people will have to be very cautious in dealing as to what happens. We are not denying the fact it's under 12 hours that we will know, and what happens subsequently, people are going to be eagerly looking forward to. But let's hope it happens for the good of the economy, good of the people, and the best candidate, and the candidate who's best from the American perspective and the world perspective wins the election.
Now, Mr. Bhargav, stay with us. You know, I really wanted to know from you that there's an interesting observation that has been made by an economist recently, which is published, that says that Republicans are a party of business, while Democrats are a party for the labor class. Now, what do you have to say about that? What kind of views do you hold on that front? Mr. Bhargava?
You see, there's no denying Republicans are pro-business people. Yeah, I'm coming to it. Donald Trump, more so, has been a businessman. But let's look at two aspects here. One, Democratic candidates have always been supportive of India in a better way than Republicans in the past. That's the history. But this time, Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, has had a greater outreach to India and Indians. So that has been there. But then it's no longer what one man wants it. It's a globalized economy. There are compulsions. We know India is a huge market. No business can ignore. No country can ignore. And considering the fact that India has this Make in India thing, Prime Minister Modi has been to the United States, had several rounds of meeting with the US business people who have committed themselves to setting up their establishments in India. Now you can't have a president, the new president more so, who says, I'm not going to be advocating that approach kind of a thing. It's going to take place irrespective of what the president believes, because it's in the interest of the United States to generate business, because if US businessman does not come to India, somebody else will. Now that's the kind of globalization that is taking place in the economy. So people will have to take a global view. You can't take a view, this is good for United States and I'm going to only do those things which are good for US and not for the rest of the people. No country will tolerate now. More so, you have the Indian scenario. We are active. We are looking at the world economy, inviting business people. Prime Minister Modi has been pro-business. Like anybody can say, we haven't had this kind of a thing, open outreach to the business people world over, make an India approach. So all these things will get business people going. So irrespective of who gets elected as the President of the United States will not be able to ignore India. And one conclusive evidence of this is, if you just go back 3 years ago, you had the Indian Prime Minister being denied visa to the United States. But the last 2 years have shown how friendly United States has been to Prime Minister Modi.
Thank you, Mr. Bhargava, for that. Stay with us. We're going to come to you very shortly. We have patched on Roddy Sale, really, who is joining us from Mumbai now. Now, Roddy, is there a chance of the American economy crippling if Hillary decides to hike taxes by $1 trillion? What do you think is likely to happen to the American economy? From there, we pick on the cue for the Indian economy and for EU as well, for which I'm likely to come to Jasper.
I think that Hillary is extremely pro-business. So I think the chance of her doing such a radical move as to raise taxes by that level is a fairly remote chance. So I think of all the risks that we're looking at, I think that is on the lower likelihood of occurring.
What about you, Jasper? What kind of a view do you hold on that now? The American economy, do you see a chance of that crippling, with Hillary's policies, or do you think that's good for America?
I'm with Roddy. I think the likelihood of it is very slim indeed. And you haven't seen similar rhetoric during the pre-election period.
Right.
So I think it's unlikely.
Now, many investors fear that Hillary's foreign policy will not augur well for the world. Your thoughts on that, Roddy?
I feel that Hillary's understanding of India and indeed the world is considerably stronger than Trump's. And furthermore, we should never forget that the checks and balances within the American system will fairly much prevent her doing anything very unlikely. I'm also told that there's tremendous support for Hillary from the US diplomacy and retired military. So I think she'll have a tremendous level of input from that constituency. So I would be reasonably confident that her policies internationally will not be that disruptive.
Mr. Raina, does Hillary's economic policy augur well for India Incorporated?
I think it definitely does. However, my point is that whatever rhetoric has been made in these elections, I think some of it will happen. So I think it's not something that we can't really discount that nothing is going to happen. But I think some of it is going to happen, especially from the Trump side, whatever changes he's talking about. It will happen to an extent, but we don't know how far he can go. But definitely, I think there's scope for all of that happening. As far as Hillary's policies is, like I said, it's a continuation of what Obama has clearly spelled out along with Narendra Modi. It won't be very dramatic from that as far as change is concerned. But at the same time, it's not going to be very innovative either, in my mind.
All right, Mr. Bhargava, I'm going to come to you very quickly before we get into a break. Now, international trade has been a major point of emphasis for Trump. He feels that America has entered into horrible trade deals. He even has gone on to say he'd like to renegotiate or break the NAFTA. Your thoughts at this point of time?
You see, you can make any kind of statement in your pre-election speeches. The reality is, once you assume office, you take a calibrated approach, because then you take a 360-degree view. You are not taking an isolated. He is speaking at the moment from outside the White House. He is making statements that will perhaps appeal to his constituency. So that is why we got to give time. In pre-election speeches, a lot of people make a lot of commitments, and you can see it anywhere in the world, in any democracy. The reality is, once you are in the chair, you assume responsibility, you have a set of advisors who do not allow you to run amok, take a decision which you think can be suicidal. And it's done, even if you want to achieve a certain goal, it's done in a calibrated manner, rather than one assuming, well, the moment a new president comes in, you can expect such a decision to be implemented in the next couple of months. It doesn't happen that way.
Mr. Bhargava, thank you for that opinion. Now, time now for us to take a short break right here on Wion Wallet. Stay with us, Mr. Bhargava. Stay with us, Roddy Sale as well. We're going to come to you very shortly and also look at how the American presidential election would have an impact on commodities and equities going forward as well. Stay with us. We'll be back in a short break.